G'day poker people, welcome back. After returning to the United States, I've been living with my girlfriend for a few months at this point, and we even got our own place to rent in northern Tampa, and things were going absolutely wonderfully. Whenever we weren't busy working or gambling, we spent almost every hour together, spending time together, and honestly, I can't remember a time in my life when I've been more happy. So I decided to make a bit of an aggressive play to try and lock things in, and that's when I actually asked Brennan to marry me, and I guess I was running good that day because she actually said yes. And this made me so happy, not only because I get to spend the rest of my life with someone I love dearly, that almost goes without saying, but also it meant together as a team, we could really lock in and try to build a future together. The first thing was on the cards was the wedding, of course, and I didn't really want to have like a big expensive celebration, but I knew Brendan didn't want to go to the courthouse and just sign some papers either, so we would have to decide on a middle ground option of maybe a smaller event with family and friends, and we would have to organize this over the coming months, as well as setting a date and eventually paying for all of this. The second thing was on the cards was the one I was more concerned with, and that's actually buying a house. I've been renting ever since I moved out of home, and I absolutely hate the idea of me just paying a landlord somewhere to rent when I could alternatively be paying a mortgage and putting equity towards a house. So I've always wanted to get a house. Brennan felt the same, and so we definitely wanted to start saving up to get at least a down payment on a property, and we were thinking of getting somewhere in the Tampa suburbs for around $400,000 should get us somewhere in a nice area. So that means if we want to get a 20% down payment of $80,000, we needed to start saving, which is where this new challenge comes in. I'm going to give myself 2 years to save up $123,456, which should be, even after I pay taxes, enough to cover an $80,000 down payment on a house. So that's what I'm doing for my challenge. The following vlogs are going to be covering me trying to save up that amount of money to put a down payment on a house. My fiance and I were in a very fortunate situation at the time where she was working full time and I was still doing video editing as a part-time gig. So that money could actually be used towards paying our bills. So in the meantime, I could really just put all of my poker winnings towards the down payment. So we are in a really good spot to save up the money in a 2-year time frame. I just needed to grind. So that's what I was planning to do. I was back to the Seminole Hard Rock Tampa over the following 2 weeks, try and start saving up for this challenge. Let's not waste any more time and get in the action. First hand up a passive hijack open limps, and then I'm in the cutoff with pocket nines. I ISO raise it up to 35, and then the button to my direct left, who's been playing very splashy so far. He's got a big gold chain on, expensive watches, and he was actually sitting at the table with his girlfriend. Been giving action to the table before, but then he raises it up to 225 and then claims, I haven't even looked at my cards yet. The action folds back to the hijack who marks. Now the action's on me. If the opponent really hasn't looked at their cards, I think it's a slam dunk spot to go all in with pocket nines. Our equity against any two cards is going to be fantastic, and we're going to benefit a lot from fold equity if he even does decide to look down his cards and then fold. So if we do believe him, that's the play we should make. But honestly, between me and you guys, I think this guy's completely full of shit. I think 100% he has looked at his cards and he probably has an absolute premium. He had been giving lots of action, 3-betting really aggressively, but he'd never 3-bet at this large. So that's one red flag that he has a premium, but he's never claimed I haven't looked before. He's definitely 3-bet some nonsense and, shown 7 deuce or whatever, but he's never claimed beforehand that he hadn't. So these are all red flags. I think this guy is bold-faced lying, and he probably has aces or kings. And so I go with my read in the spot, and I do decide to fold my pocket nines. And as I fold, I actually say, if you really didn't look, man, good play. I fold my hands, and then he says, I did look, and he turns over the pocket aces. So hey, I was right with my read there, and thank God, because otherwise I would have been in a lot of trouble with this hand. Let's see if we can keep rolling in this next hand. A aggressive low jack opens to 35. No limpers, no straddle or anything, just the classic cold 7x open, and then a very short stack cutoff calls, and the action's on my button with king queen suited, and we're facing these really large open sizes. I really don't like to have cold calls. I think it's just going to be a spot where you're going to benefit from overfolding because you think they have a really strong range, or over bluffing because you think they're just raising with absolute nonsense, and then you're going to win a larger pot just by taking the pot down there. So it's the 3-bet or fold spot in my opinion. I think just just because this opponent is really aggressive, I've got to give them credit for some weaker opens, even with a larger size. So that leans me towards thinking it's a really good 3-bet spot. But if you're facing the type of player who only opens this large because they have aces or kings and doesn't want them cracked or something, then I would definitely get behind folding this hand. But I don't think that's this opponent, so I do decide to 3-bet. I go ahead and make it 150, and then the low jack calls and the cutoff goes all in for 250. So this does not reopen action, so I don't really have a choice. I only have to call in this spot, and then the low jack calls as well. So even though we're 3 ways to a main pot of 750, we've got a $0 side pot between me and the low jack. So us two go heads up to a flop of Queen 9-6 rainbow. The low jack checks it over to me, and in this spot, I definitely think we want to have a C bet. I actually think this spot with the $0 side pot, it's a good spot to go ahead and bet really small with most of your range. It's going to be kind of obvious that we're not trying to bluff a $0 side pot, and we're going to need to have some hand with equity. But if we do bet small, it actually makes sense to do that with some bluffs, just to try and build up a pot, keep the opponent's weak range in, and then bluff them off of the side pot later. So I think it's best to bet something like 150 or less in this spot. In game, I went ahead and bet 300. I think this is a bit of a spew, and I should not be using this large of a size. Whatever the case, I did make the mistake in game and bet 300, and then the low jack calls. So we're heads up to the turn, which is the 7 of hearts, putting out backdoor hearts. The low jack checks it over to me again, and now I think we have a pretty interesting spot, whether we want to go all in or just check it. The main reason I would like checking here is to induce bluffs from the villain. But if I do think they're going to get a bit sticky and they're not going to fold a worse Queen X or like pocket jacks on this turn, maybe it's a good spot to just rip it all in and try and get value from those hands. That's what I decided to do in game here. I ripped it all in for 1,150, and then the villain turns over his cards and he has King 10 of diamonds. So as much as I said I didn't like my large bet on the flop, we actually got a lot of value from a gut shot. Of course, he ends up deciding to fold this hand here. He doesn't have that much gamble in him. He folds, and then I end up scooping the side pot straight away, but then end up showing my hand to the short stack cutoff, who's still in the hand, and they end up showing King 10 suited as well. So wow, they both have the same hand. I'm not complaining though. Great spot for us. We just have to fade the jack on the river, and we're going to scoop the 750 main pot as well. And the river is 10 of spades. Let's go. That's not a jack, and we're jacking in this pot. Let's jack it. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different anti-gambling gambling club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colors. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. Let's see if we can keep the momentum going with this next hand. A passive player limps under the gun, and then a loose aggressive hijack makes it 20. And the action's on my cutoff with Queen 9 of spades. I just decide to 3-bet to 70 here. Might be a bit loose. I was looking to attack this guy's opens pretty aggressively because he had been opening a lot, but maybe I'm pushing it a little bit too far with this hand. Close spot either way. If it's a mistake, it's probably only a small one. So I 3-bet it up to 70. And then the limper and the original raise a call. So we are 3 ways to a flop. 10-10-6 with 2 spades. So let's go. We do make a flush draw. When the action checks to me though, I think this might be a good spot to go ahead and check it and take a free card. I think it's pretty likely that the under the gun player in particular has a lot of pocket pair combinations in their range that probably just aren't going to fold to a bet. So if they do have a really strong pair like jacks or queens or even a trapped aces pre-flop, then I really just want to take a free turn card and see if I can win a bigger pot by getting my flush for free. So I check it in this instance, and then we do get to see a free turn, which is the ace of diamonds putting out backdoor diamonds. And then the under the gun player leads for 40. Hijack folds. The action's back on me now, and I really didn't think that this $40 bet it didn't convince me that he had a strong hand, I'll put it like that. So I actually thought maybe this is a good spot to go ahead and raise and try and represent ace king or ace queen and get them to fold a worse ace, or charge them for a draw that we can bluff them off on the river. So I decided to raise it up to 150. This is a pretty aggressive play, and if my read on their range is wrong, then I'm going to be in a lot of trouble, because I do give them credit for pocket aces and some 10x combinations maybe as well. Whatever the case, I make an aggressive raise, I made it 150, and then the villain throws in the call. It's not quite what we wanted to see, but we will have another opportunity to bluff him on the river. And the river is the Jack of Diamonds. Actually really don't like this river. I think the opponent might have bet folded pocket jacks on the turn, so I'm not that worried about jacks specifically, but still they could have pocket aces, pocket tens, maybe like a Jack 10 suited or 10-9 suited as well. King Queen of Diamonds, maybe even like 6-5 of Diamonds. They're all strong hands they have in their range. So when they check it over to me, I think this might be a good spot to just give up on the bluff against a passive opponent. Having said that though, if we don't bluff with this hand, what the hell are we bluffing with on this board? We're going to have so many strong hands here. Maybe I can get an opponent of a missed spade draw or a weak ace X of spades. So I do need to size up if I do want them to fold an ace. I decide to bet 400 here. Looking back at this play, I definitely think it's a mistake. If I am going to bluff them off an ace, probably should just be going all in to really put the fear of God into them. Whatever the case, though, I do think this is a bad play, and the opponent does have a lot of strong hands in their range. But I'm spewing today. I went ahead and made it 400, and then the villain rips it all in for 780. Ugh, absolutely hate to see it. They almost definitely have a flush or a full house. Maybe a 10x is getting really thin for value, but whatever the case, queen high is no bueno. I end up folding and pretty disappointed with this spewy play here, if I'm being totally honest. Let's try and play this next hand a bit better. We've got a button straddle on this time and then a passive small blind open limps. And then I'm in what would have been the under the gun position with ace queen offsuit. I go ahead and make it 55 and then I get action from 3 different callers. So we go 4 ways to a flop of ace king 8 rainbow. Small blind checks it over to me. Really don't like c-betting out of position to multiple people. I will say though, if we are going to do it with any hand, ace queen is a great hand to do it with because this is going to be the main street where we can get value from worse ace x and gut shot combinations. So I decide to bet in this instance. Could go either way though. I make it 60 and then I only get action from the cutoff and small blind to call. So we still go 3 ways to a turn, which is the ace of spades putting out backdoor spades. Love to make trips on the turn, but before I can go ahead and bet it myself, the small blind actually leads out for 120. The action's on me here, and in the game I was actually kind of confused as to whether I should just call or raise. Looking back at the hand now, I actually think this is a pretty clear raise spot. I think the small blind's going to have a bunch of worse ace-x combinations that are definitely not going to fold to a turn raise here. Plus they can have a bunch of backdoor flush draws that are deciding to lead, combo draws. So I think there's a bunch of stuff we can get value from. I made a mistake in game though. I think maybe I just like underthought it and just wanted to play it a bit trappy to induce bluffs from the small blind on the river, but I definitely think flooding's a mistake. I do decide to call though, and then the cutoff does overcall. So we are still 3 ways to a river, which is the 9 of spades. Really don't like the spade getting in. I think the chances either of the opponents has a flush here is pretty likely. And then it gets even more likely when the small blind continues betting for 300. Really hate this spot. I think the chances I'm behind are very likely. Not only a flush, but also full houses are possible, being that I think both the opponents have a bunch of ace-x offsuit combinations in their range that do make full houses on this board. A slow played set wouldn't be totally a shock to me either. So I think I just have to fold at this point. Really disappointing I didn't raise and charge the small blinds draws on the turn, but my mistake, I guess. I do end up folding my hand here, and then the cutoff goes all in for 765. Now I'm feeling great because it's hard to imagine the cutoffs going all in with anything worse than a flush in this spot. They rip it all in. The small blind player calls a bet, and the cutoff shows ace 9 offsuit, and the small blind does show jack 10 of spades. So it turns out they both got there on the river. Kicking myself for not raising on the turn. Even though I would have lost a bigger pot playing it like that, it's still a mistake, and I just sort of let them get there for cheaper than I should have. All right, really need to play a hand well for once. Let's try it again in this next one. We're 7-handed playing 2-5, and I'm under the gun with ace 10 offsuit, and this is a pretty trivial fold, out of position to this many people. I decided to raise it up for 15, so still not playing well yet. This is a mistake, definitely too loose to open, probably a discipline issue in all honesty. I made it 15 though, but we get really lucky because the only callers are from the small blind and big blind, so we still get to play this pot in position anyway. So we go 3 ways to a flop of king queen 9 rainbow. So when the action checks to me, I think this is a pretty easy spot to check it back. We're going to make a bunch of EV if we do hit our gut shot, because I think both the opponents are going to have a lot of jack X combos. We're just going to absolutely cool their hearts out. So I really don't want to induce folds with a bet here, and if we do get action, like, we're in pretty bad shape to only drawing to a gut shot. So I make the check here. It's a decision I made well. Let's go. So we do get to see a free turn, which is the 6 of clubs putting out backdoor clubs. Then the small blind bets 15 and the big blind calls. And now facing bets this small, I actually think it's a good spot to overcall and still try to draw towards our gut shot. What I said about hitting it on the flop is still true here. If I hit it on the river, I think I'm winning a really big pot from 2 ranges that have a bunch of Jack X. And the fact that we're in position makes it an even more appetizing spot, in my opinion. So I do decide to throw in the call, hoping we get there on the river. And the river is the 8 of clubs. So unfortunately, we do not get there. Small blind keeps betting at it. They go ahead and make it 50. And then the big blind folds. Now the action's on me here, and I'm going to state the obvious. I'm not going to hero call with ace high here. If the opponent is bluffing, I actually think it's pretty likely they are bluffing with a pair. So calling the bet would be pretty suicidal. The fact that I'm almost certain I'm behind means that folding is going to be a plus EV play. I say this all the time on the video. If you're convinced you're behind, folding's a good idea. But I actually think we might be able to bluff them off with a raise here. I think the opponent is going to have a bunch of King X combinations, some 2 pairs and even a straight. But those cards are really going to hate this river when the flush gets in. And the fact that we do have the 10x of clubs means the opponent just has less combinations of flushes in this spot. They're going to be able to call a raise. So I think it might be a good spot to put the pressure on with a bluff raise. So that's what I do. I go ahead and make it 200. And then the opponent is thinking for maybe like 10 seconds before eventually folding. And then they ask me, did you have a flush? And in game, I said, I had something like that. A tight aggressive button opens it up to 15, and then I'm in the small blind with 5-4 suited. You definitely do want to be 3-betting the small blind very aggressively versus a button opening range. 5-4 maybe a bit too loose, but also not the worst hand to do it with either. I decided to take the aggressive line here because folding is boring. I go ahead and make it 70, and then the button does call. So we are heads up to a flop of ace 5-5, baby, with 2 diamonds. Let's go. We 3-bet the trash hand and get absolutely rewarded by flopping a monster. Definitely want to c-bet this hand for value. I go ahead and make it 50, and then the button calls. So we get to see that turn. Boy, am I glad we did, because it's the 5 of hearts. Quads, baby, let's go. And it's even better than that because I think the opponent is going to have a bunch of ace-x combinations in their range, defending against a small blind 3-bet. So we're probably going to get their stack if they do have an ace-x at this point. So I think it's a great spot to start bombing it. I go ahead and bet 200, and then the villain does call. So we are heads up to a river, which is the 4 of diamonds. Definitely have to go all in this spot. It will be a slight overbet of the pot, but I just really don't think the opponent's going to have like ace-jack or ace-10 suited here and then folding it, figuring that we're going to be chopping a lot of the time. It's a pretty brutal cooler, and it kind of makes this hand very easy to play. Still happy regardless. I rip it all in for the 680, and then the villain calls pretty quickly. We end up showing our quads and the opponent mucks, so we don't get to see what they had, but we rake in this pot. Unfortunately, the quad 5s were not good enough to go on the high hand board because there was already quad aces there, but I'm still not complaining. We're raking in this big pot. Let's go. Fun to run good. Let's see if we run good in this next hand. The action folds to my small blind, and before I even look at my cards, I ask the big blind if they wanted to chop, and they say, no, I don't chop, I never chop. And I'm like, cool, fair enough. So I look down at my cards and I have 7-6 of hearts, definitely a hand strong enough to raise up in a blind versus blind dynamic, in my opinion. And the one thing I will say, if I was playing like a game with an anti-structure or something that didn't take rake out of the pot, it might be a good hand to open limp and see what the big blind does. But when you're playing in a game that does not rake pre-flop but rakes post-flop, there's just going to be more incentive to try and take the pot down now with your medium hands as well as your strong hands and even some really weak hands. So I will be playing a raise or fold strategy in this instance when the big blind insists on playing, but enough of that. We go ahead and raise it up to 15, and then the big blind calls. So we go heads up to a flop of Jack 8-8 with 2 diamonds. The action's on me here, and I think the best play here probably is to check and see what the opponent does. We're actually not going to check it here. I did decide to go ahead and bet 15. Bit of a discipline, aggressive bias issue here. I think checking is definitely the better play with this hand. Whatever the case, I went ahead and bet 15, and then the villain does call. So we're still heads up to a turn, which is the 5 of spades putting out backdoor spades and giving us an open-ended straight draw, which we love to see. So I definitely think we want to continue betting now that we have more equity, now that we can still adequately represent the Jack X and stronger, as well as some 8x hands. I think the opponent's going to have a lot of overcard floats that are just going to fold on this turn. Like if they had King Queen or Ace Jack or Ace Queen or something like that, that. I think they're probably just going to fold on this turn, giving me credit for a lot of pairs. So I think it's a great spot to go ahead and bet and try and get some folds. I went ahead and bet 75. I don't know if I need to go this big to fold out overcards. I'm trying to fold out some pairs with this bigger bet, as well as actually credibly represent a strong Jack X or 8X combination, which I will be using these size with. So definitely a bigger size, which might be a mistake. Whatever the case, I overbet it to 75. And then the villain throws in the call. So not what we wanted to see. We're going to have to either get there on the river or maybe try and bluff them again. And the river is the ace of spades. So we absolutely do not get there. But the backdoor flush draw does get in, and the action's on me here, and I think this is actually a good spot to continue to bluff. We do unblock the villain's front door flush draws. They're going to have a pretty easy fold. As well, if the villain was calling down with a Jack X combination, it's going to be really hard for them to call off on this river when it's an ace, when the backdoor flush got in, when I still have a bunch of 8X combinations in my range. Plus, I also think it's a bit less likely that the villain does have trips when they decide to just flat on the turn. I think a lot of those combinations are going to want to raise on a board that's this ridiculously wet. So I still think this is a good spot to continue to bluff, and I want to continue telling the story I told on the turn. I have an absolute monster, and I'm going for max value. So if I'm going to bluff here, I think an overbet is the right size, really trying to fold them off of a Jack X or strong pair combination. So I go ahead and bet 300. The villain kind of goes... sits back in his chair, so he's got a decision. He's clearly not just have some random flush draw. He has some type of pair, and he thinks about it for maybe 15 seconds before folding. Let's go. We get another bluff through. Yeah, love to see it. So that wraps it up. The first 2 weeks of the challenge. Definitely not bad results by any means, but we are a little bit behind par in terms of where I want to be to make $123,465 in the next 2 years. So definitely want to try and pick it up in the next video, where I'm actually going to go play at a different card room in a much bigger game. So hit subscribe and you'll get that video when it comes out next week. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.